Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Activities for People Living with Dementia. My name is Martha Brown, and I am your volunteer with Dementia Friendly Fort Worth. We are proud to offer this series with funding from the Area Agency on Aging and the United Way of Tarrant County. These programs are recorded and are made available for viewing through a YouTube channel for future use. I am your host for today's activities, and our topic today is presented by Peggy Spear with the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. Her topic today is children. Take it away, Peggy.
Thanks, Martha. And you know what? You were right last week. I had inverted my calendar. So we really are doing children. I apologize for the I tell you what.
Horses, children, it's okay.
And you know what? Sometimes taking care of children is like taking care of horses.
That's right.
Saying listen to what.
If I'm in my second childhood, do I count as a child?
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
We're all children.
I'm with you. I'm with you. And whatever you bring, Peggy, we will love it.
Oh, well, good. You guys are an easy crowd. That's why I love you so much.
Good.
All right, friends. Children. So we're gonna hit it all over the place with children today. We've got our first painting, which this is one of our paintings that actually isn't on view. And I've never, as long as I've worked here, I've been here now 8 years, and I've never even seen it in person. But this is a painting in our collection called Portrait of Mother and 5 Children. So tell me what you see here.
I see
mother
5
and
children.
children.
A mother and children. Yes, you got it.
It looks like they're spaced out in age. Looks like maybe I think the girl that's sitting next to the mother, maybe the oldest. And
Right
the
here.
boy, yeah. And the boy that's right might be the next oldest. And I'm not sure about the rest of them.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of guess who ages.
But they're
You can
dressed
tell.
up.
They're dressed up, yes.
You can tell they're all the same family because they look very similar in their
Yes, they do.
face.
Okay, yeah, they're all from the same family.
But actually, the children's face is just a replica of the mother's, it looks like.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, especially the
For the
mother and
baby.
daughter.
Yeah.
They all look like they're going to Sunday school.
Yeah, in their fancy clothing, like Yetta said, they're dressed up.
Mm-hmm.
With the rabbits.
With a
Rabbit.
rabbit, yeah.
Oh,
A basket of cherries or something.
Yep.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the boy here has a book,
A
Yeah.
book. And then this little baby,
has an orange.
A
apple or
toy.
orange.
Or a ball. Or
Pomegranate.
something.
Yes, definitely a fruit of some sort
and there's some fruit down there.
on here. And then we see her, I'm guessing the mother's sun hat.
Hmm.
From a fairly upper scale family
What makes you say that?
because of the clothing.
Fancier clothing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a lower class family.
So we know that are any of you familiar with what this style of artwork is called?
Portrait.
It is a portrait. You're exactly right. It is a portrait. It's a family portrait. And we don't know who any of the people are.
Yeah.
But this
Is that-
style, say it again, Don.
I was gonna say, is that a real background in back, or is that like a painted screen or something?
Well, it's a background of something kind of generic. It's not specific to probably where this family lived.
Okay.
The Olin Mills background.
Say that again. Yes, exactly.
Olin
It's like an
Mills
Olin Mills
background.
background. Exactly right.
Yeah,
And
well,
that's funny that you say that, Martha, because that's kind of what this type of painting is called, or this style of painting is called folk art. And so
Faux.
I'm sure you can think of, you probably have seen folk art paintings, portraits hanging in families' houses or museums, things like that. But so this type of artist, it was an itinerant painter. Does anyone know what that is?
He was poor and didn't get paid.
Close.
Traveling.
Yes, he was a traveling artist.
Ooh.
And he would get paid. I mean, he wasn't rolling in the dough, but he would get paid. And an itinerant artist would travel from city to city or typically within a region, a state, something like that, and would stay for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, and paint portraits, and then move on to the next city, and he would get paid. So he wasn't working in a studio per se. He had to be able to bring everything with him, and he had to be able to work quickly. So this Olson Mills background was probably a background he did over and over and over again, because he figured out the formula on how I can quickly crank out this type of background.
Mhm.
And so it has a generic feel to it. Like it could be any natural scene. You might, there's nothing that identifies it as, oh, this is in Pittsburgh versus this is in New York City.
Mhm.
And so he got this particular painter, who we don't know who it is, but assuming he's an itinerant portrait artist, would just kind of crank these scenes out. So it lacks a lot of specific details.
It looks like
go
there's
ahead.
looks like there's three boys. The two smaller ones look like boys too, because the clothing for a younger boy was different than an older boy in
Yes,
that day and age.
Yes.
yes.
So around, and this is Puritan era,
Mhm.
boys would wear petticoats until they were old enough to wear trousers.
Yeah.
So sometimes you wouldn't necessarily know which is a boy and which is a
Oh,
girl
boy.
Oh, yeah.
in the portraits. And we talked about, we couldn't really quite guess their age. This is also we can tell maybe some might be a little bit older than others, but that was very common of these portraits, where proportion and size didn't really match, and people who were more important might be larger than someone who is of a lesser importance. So the mother here is the largest. Would you agree?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who do you think, who looks to be the next largest?
The
The
Yeah,
young
girl.
daughter.
lady beside him, beside
The
her.
Girl.
lady beside him.
The girl.
Yeah.
She does, and so does he. And you can
Yep.
see most of his body, which might indicate, because he was probably the firstborn boy in the family,
Yeah.
he
Mhm.
might have more importance than, his sister. We're not
Yeah.
seeing much of his sister, but we are seeing that she looks older. So there is maybe an acknowledgement in birth order, but not necessarily in.
Why is there no father?
We don't know. We don't know who this family was. So I don't know why that father isn't there.
So Peggy, how do
Yeah.
we know that the baby is really a girl? Do we know that? Or since they wear the kind of down things when they're a baby, no matter what.
Yeah, it would suggest to me it's a girl, in that the ribbon around her bonnet is pink,
Okay.
and she's wearing bracelets that mimic the necklace of her mom
Okay.
and the necklace of her sister.
That's right.
And-
Okay. Thank
And
you.
the sleeves
Red
are
shoes.
more puffy, like a girl's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Modern hair. Yeah, she's.
But that baby, we don't know, and this is very popular too, of these types of portraits, folk art portraits painted during this time. Someone might be dead in this family, and we don't know it, but this portrait was still made as a way to kind of commemorate what that
Mhm.
family unit was. But again, we don't know who any of these sitters are. So that baby might not have actually lived, speculation. And there are portraits where it's like, oh, well, we know for a fact that in that family of 10, only 4 of the children were actually living to adulthood or something like that. But they wanted a portrait of all of their children. So we don't know anything about that with this particular family, but that is something that could be, that maybe not all of these children had survived past a certain age in childhood. Another thing too that's really common with these portraits is, and someone pointed out the bunny,
Mhm.
just throwing in animals, and they meant nothing, or sometimes they were emblematic, like this little girl maybe holding the fruit, that could have been emblematic of something in their family that ties them to that particular fruit. This older boy holding a book, he might have been in training to go to university or learning to go to university.
Well, yeah, he might be the one that's being taught to read.
Exactly. Yeah. So there could be, I mean, again, since we don't know anything about this family, that we don't know what those symbols necessarily mean. The same thing with the bunny, that could mean something, or it could just be a cute fuzzy furry that they threw in there because that kid needed something with his hands. As you can see, not many hands are shown. Hands were really, really hard to paint. And so like I'm sure you've heard the turn of phrase, it cost me an arm and a leg.
Yep.
That stems from portraiture. If you wanted your hands or feet shown, that cost a lot more than just having your portrait of, maybe your bust shown. So hands were hard to paint. So we can see the mother's hands and, references to hands, but we're not seeing the full detailing that might a artist who was formally trained might do. And so a lot of misconception is that a folk artist was not formally trained. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes a lot of the times these artists were sign painters or had trained under another artisan and then shifted from a utilitarian paint form to a more of a portraiture or landscape type of paint form. And so they were able to transfer some of those skills, but it wasn't that they didn't have any training. It's these artists typically lived outside of the city, not in a major city center, which contributed to that thought that these artists weren't actually trained, which is misleading. So, the backgrounds, the poses, the objects that the sitters are holding, you would see in a portrait artist, painting in the city. It's just done in a very different Latin style. And these artists were very mathematical about how they were cranking these out so that it feels pretty formulaic what they're doing. Can you tell me much about their personalities? Are you able to see much about who they are as a person?
No, not at all.
No.
No. And that was part of it too. It was these people who wanted the portrait painted, not necessarily wanted parts of their personality shown. It was more of a just showing we exist and this is kind of what we look like. And so that was another part of what these folk art paintings look like. So you can think of maybe some styles of paintings you've seen like this where you really don't get to know much about the person or their personality. You just kind of know, you sort of have an idea about their socioeconomic class because of maybe the style of clothing or the elaborate, the fanciness of their clothing. But even then, that's kind of circumspect. We don't know how wealthy this family was.
Yeah.
This could have been the nicest outfit they ever owned, and that was it. So it's more of a not capturing a moment of their lives, capturing more of the fact that they existed.
So you mentioned the everybody with a serious look on their faces. Portraits in early photography, I've seen some of my family portraits or pictures from a long time ago, and they're all standing there look like they're at a funeral when they're just getting picture taken.
Yeah.
Part of that too with photography, that's a little bit different. They would have to stand still for so long for that exposure that, could you imagine holding your file for several minutes? It would start to look fake. It would start to
just
fade.
like that. Yeah.
They even had devices for portraits like that. If they were sitting where you couldn't see it, but their head was being held in place, their body was being held in place, so that if they ever started to slouch, there was something to kind of keep their body in position. So those photographs are kind of a product of the photographic technology.
Okay, thank you.
And it was probably also in vogue too. You don't want like your pearly whites where you're, gun, blinking and gun kind of, it was very straightforward. These are the likes of these people and that's all you're going to get. And again, this artist was kind of cranking through these portraits. So he didn't really get time to know these people. He didn't really want to learn about these people. It was, I want my money. I've got to go to the next family so then I can go to the next town. So there was a speediness to it that kind of eliminated some of those nuances.
The background.
Right, so we're going to move. Oh, Martha, were you going to say something?
The background is the most alive part of it.
Yeah.
That's sad.
that the shading of it and stuff. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that was very common too, with this style of portrait, using just broad swipes of color. Their faces have almost no change in tone to them. I mean, it's so
Mhm.
a lot of broad coloring, not going in with detail. I mean, you can see pleats and shadows in her, but it's all one solid color.
So I just noticed something, Peggy.
Yeah.
This person over here on the left
Yeah.
looks like it's behind this tree.
Mhm.
Would that have been painted that way just for perception?
Yeah. And that sometimes is a tool to indicate this child has died.
Oh, okay.
But we don't know. We don't know anything about this particular family, but that kind of where he's not necessarily, that child might not necessarily be engaging with the family, but the child is being acknowledged in the family. This is sometimes a tool artists
Okay.
would use to indicate life versus death. We don't know about this particular case, but he's not touching his family the way the rest of his
No, that's correct.
Good point.
So we don't know. And he's holding clovers. There's three-leaf clover, which again, this was painted during a time where religion was also conveyed a lot. So that could have been Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It could have been, something else within their religious practice that would indicate, the Trinity, whatever. But there is a specific plant he's holding.
Well, I can't imagine he's able to hold that rabbit for a portrait and it stays that position for the whole time.
And that's part of that itinerant painting. Throw in a cat, throw in a bunny, throw in a dog, that you see animals a lot thrown in. And in this particular artist might have been really good at painting bunnies. So several paintings of his would have bunnies in them.
Okay.
So we're going to move to another portrait. So this is oil on canvas. We're moving to another portrait and painted in this same style. And this is watercolor on paper. So what are we seeing here that is kind of similar to what we saw before?
I think it's a little girl and she's dressed up very nicely.
Yes, nice clothing.
Generic background.
Generic background, yeah, exactly.
And no expression in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right, you got a very dead face. What's different about this particular portrait?
She's got her feet.
We see her feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we see a full body.
She's
It
out
looks
of
like
proportion. Sorry, Steve.
It looks like she's holding a flower, but she has flowers in a basket too.
Yeah.
Right, you're right.
Yeah.
And Martha, you said something about her proportion?
She is out of proportion. Her
Yeah.
head's as
Right.
big as her waist.
Yeah.
And her
Yeah.
feet are so tiny.
Mhm.
It's almost like she's a little adult that they just shrunk her to make her look like a kid, but her proportions don't make sense. What we do know is that there's an actual person attributed to creating this. And we do know that this was a real person, the name of this particular person. So we do have a little more detail about that. But yeah, you guys hit all of the same attributes of this folk art type of painting. And so in both instances, this was painted, these are Northeast, assuming they're Northeast, just given the type of portrait that they are. Folk art was really a Northeast style, just because that's where most of the country at this point was really, there was a lot of art and action happening up in the Northeast where these artists were painting in this type of style. And it was this was part of the country that was really Puritan based and raised. So this idea that this little girl looks like a little adult plays into that Puritan mindset. I don't know if you or anybody Puritan buffs or know a lot about the Puritan practice. Children were treated exactly like adults.
Yeah.
It was children were born, they were ignorant, they were born into sin, and they've got to spend their entire lives trying to get on the good side of God again.
Yeah.
So things were very dull. Things were very serious. Women had, children, girls had a certain role, the same, and the boys had a certain role, the same as adults, starting at 7. So it felt very stern, very strict. And so this little girl, it's funny that she's outside because women were really meant to be indoors at this was the thinking at the time. But she's holding flowers, so then there's that feminine.
It almost looked like, Peggy, to me, that they painted the trees first and then put the girl in.
Part of that itinerant painting. I think you're right. This
Yeah.
particular artist might have known exactly how I want to frame whoever it is. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry I can throw in there. I've got my background set.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be part of it too. But yeah, again, we don't know anything about this particular person.
This was a few years before the Civil War. So this is sort of a Scarlett O'Hara kind of a girl, where they were supposed to be helped by mammies and nannies and kept indoors and powdered faces and prim and proper. She just looks exactly like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the expectations out of children were what you said, prim and proper, seen, not heard. Do what you're said. If not, you will be beaten within an inch of your life. I mean, it was very, very abusive, unfortunately, for these children, as a scare tactic to make them washed of their original sin, basically.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The sky in the background is almost the same color as her face. And I've heard of painters that use a certain color in the background, so it's easier to get the right color on the face. I don't know if that looks like the same.
Yeah, so that's there's an Italian word for it, and I always, that's not Penamenti, but it's, yes, they would use red. Bingham, we've looked at artist Bingham before. It would be a red to give them a cheery. But this particular artist would not have been painting like that.
Okay.
It's the wash of it's the color of the paper, and that it's just a watercolor on paper. So too, also this watercolor fades really quickly. So until it came into our collection, we have no idea how this could have been kept.
Yeah.
It could have been exposed to a lot of sun or just water. I mean, you can see there are creases.
Yeah.
And discoloring up here. So that could also be a product of it just aging over time. But yeah, there really is not much difference between the bluish hue of the background and that sort of reddish tint to your face. All right, so we're gonna move away from some of the more serious children to some happy children.
Happy children.
Oh boy.
Happy children. So this artwork is currently on view in our galleries, and it's a sweet oil on canvas. So, or oil on a board, but it's framed. You would never know it was a board. What do we see?
Looks like they're playing a game.
Playing a game, yep. Any guess what the title of the artwork is called Bo Peep.
Yep.
But any guess on what this game is?
Peekaboo.
I heard someone say it, peekaboo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's peekaboo. It used to be called Bo Peep when this game was made, but now we know it as peekaboo. So what do we see that feels really different from the last couple of artworks we've looked at?
The smile on the girl's face.
Smile,
Yeah.
emotion.
The realism of the background.
The background, yep. This was it's speculated that this was the artist's room on the top floor of their house. So there's, personal affect to it. What else? So we see a child who's smiling.
Yep.
We see an interior that actually feels like an interior.
Yeah.
What else do we see?
Very compliant adult.
Yes.
Yes.
Lots of patience.
And that's part of what this what makes this painting so sweet is that now, it's after the Civil War. Domestic scenes are really enjoyed at this time. Domestic painted scenes, this is called a genre scene, just kind of everyday life scenes are valued because it was sort of a break from the horribleness of war that had just happened in our country. And so there's a levity to this. This mom is engaging her child.
Yeah.
This mom is not, stone cold holding this sweet little Bubs in her arms. Now this mom, she's actually playing with the child. And around this time is when, after the war, is when parenting psyche started to shift. And children were recognized as children and not adults. Children were children, and children were allowed to be children. And these happy scenes kind of were a break for that of social tension. It was, something everybody could relate to, whether you're north or south.
Folks, I'm going to have to leave.
All right, Steve, thanks.
I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, Peggy.
We're
Thank
going to
you.
do
Welcome to next week.
conversations tomorrow.
Bye.
Steve.
Have to leave too.
Bye, Nancy.
Bye, Miss Nancy. Have a great day.
So, gosh, I just looked at the time. It's already almost 11.
We've got till 11:15 if you want it, Peggy.
Okay, well, then we've got your option. We can jump. We've got 2 more artworks we can look at. We can either kind of gloss through them, or we can spend more time with one or the other. And I'll show you, and we'll take a little vote.
I've got a question about this one first.
Sure.
This porcelain here. It looks like it's got a shadow on the wall. Or
It does. And what it could be too, it could have been the artist screwed up and realized the proportions were wrong and made it smaller, and then it couldn't recreate that same color again.
yeah, I can't imagine doing that. I mean,
It's real interesting. Sometimes you get these things under an X-ray machine and or infrared lighting and stuff, and you can see pencil marks. You can see people that were there that aren't there anymore. It's really you get kind of into the brain of the artist.
Wow.
Those kind of things. And another thing too that we kind of touched on with the other artwork that we're seeing here is, this is Victorian era, so there's a reference to the religious, and so we see here.
Bible.
Yeah, a Bible, and someplace where the person could kneel, and there's a cross which you can see in person, but you're not seeing here. But there's a cross detail over this way in the artwork. So again, domestic scene at home. People speculate that this was the artist's wife, and this was the artist's little girl, and her name was Ethel. So just a sweet scene of a child with her mom, and this was the only child the artist ever had. So she was a very popular subject of his artwork for a few years.
Right now
And she had time, the artist had time to paint because there was only one child.
Yeah, as best he could. And that too, the fact that he was painting in his home and not in his studio, that was kind of uncommon of the time. So it was real interesting to see that his family dynamic. He wanted to be home and with his family versus getting out of Dodge and working in a studio that was not attached to their house.
And was also not itinerant.
Yes, exactly. That is a big difference. So he was actually living in the city painting versus out in the country. I think he lived in a row home. I want to say New York, but he lived in a row home, and this was the top floor of his house. All right, so we've got 2 more artworks. We can either look at this one, or I'm making the decision for you. We'll just quickly glance at this one. This is Winslow Homer. We've talked about Homer in the past. He was an illustrator as well as a painter. And this is one of those artworks that, again, this is painted around the same, or this was an engraving done around the same time as the last artwork we saw. And it shows children, we see children having a really good time at the beach. And so again, this is what the country was needing at that time. We had just gone through the Civil War. Everybody was still recovering from that. Families were destroyed, members were killed, people had opposing views within the same family. So you don't get a sense of any of that drama. You just get a happy beach day. So we see kids playing, on the seesaw. This artwork is called Seesaw. And then we see girls playing Cat's Cradle. Do you remember
Yep.
that string game?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they're doing there. So just a happy beach scene. And that's all it really was. All right, so totally shifting gears. We have happy kids doing happy things, and now we're gonna end on a rougher note. What do we see?
We see children working in dangerous jobs.
Yes, yeah, dangerous times,
That chain is huge.
and it
Yeah.
was moving. That chain was on a belt that would have been moving, and this poor little boy, Charlie McBride, had to pull the wood. You can see there's wood slats. He would
Yep.
have to pull the wood slats off of this moving chain 10 hours a day.
Oh my.
Oh, dang.
Outdoors in Texas, in Beaumont, Texas.
In Beaumont, wow.
Oh my goodness.
So poor Charlie McBride. And sometimes when his friend here, he'd pull the wood off this chute, and he'd lay him here. And this little boy was using the saw to cut the wood. He was at least trained to use the saw, but sometimes when he wasn't there, Charlie would have to jump on the saw and use it himself.
Mm.
So this particular artist, Louis Wick Hines, made a career out of photographing the awful work conditions children were exposed to. The fact that children were even working was one thing. He is like one of the biggest, if not the biggest force that created children work labor laws. Because he was able to go around the country, all the way from Maine down to Texas, documenting these awful work conditions, and then brought them to the government. So you can see all of these, not all, but a lot of these photographs are with the government in the Library of Congress now, because these were used as the part of the federal case to change children's labor laws.
Yeah, so that might be my next question. When did children labor laws really take effect?
Oof.
You don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that.
This was taken in 1913, so I want to say that this is when it was really kicking off, and I don't know when those were actually put into effect. Especially with the Great Depression, I'm not sure how hard observed those were when people were needing to get money anywhere they could. But in big city, I mean, like kids were working 10 hours a day and only making 50 cents a day.
Yeah.
Which is equivalent to like $4 now. And so this was, we've got a circular saw, they're outdoors, they're not trained. He's 12 years old. They would like have to travel in, because these were, this was the Industrial Revolution time. So these were having to, leave certain parts of the city to get to other parts of the city. So, I mean, these kids were putting in crazy, crazy, crazy days. And so thousands of children were employed. And so this was something that was really becoming a problem in the United States. And so his photographs, he went from Maine to lumber yards. I grew up in Baltimore. There are a lot of oyster canneries and things like that going into those places where kids were using melting down tin to create the cans and falling into these molten things. So it was awful. And so we can thank Louis Hines for all of his work and helping kids be protected.
Peggy, I just Googled it. They started to try to do legislation in 1906 for child labor laws, and in 1938 was the Fair Labor Standards Act. So it took 32 years.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, and industrial revolution started in the mid 1850s.
Yes.
And children then started going to work. So I mean, almost 100 years later, they stepped in and said enough is enough. So, but you can find, if you've got Google Hines work, there's so many really very interesting pictures of these children on these different at these different factories. I mean, little children as young as like 5 years old, because their older brother was going, they would take the, so it was really bad, but we have a bunch of pictures documenting what that looked like in the United States. And this is a wood company that is in Beaumont, Texas. All right, well,
Welcome, Janine.
hi, Janine. We're just about to wrap up. We're sorry we missed you.
Yeah, I was on a call with the internet people.
Oh. Yeah, that probably wasn't a short call either. Well, next week we're back and we're doing sports. I looked ahead. We're doing sports because next Sunday is not this Sunday coming up, but the following is Super Bowl Sunday. So we're gonna get in the mood with
All right.
some images and prints and stuff from our collection that shows sports.
You're not ever going to run out of topics, are you, Peggy?
Not while we're virtual, which is awesome because I can use any artwork I want versus what's out in the walls. That's only like a fraction of what we got. So I'm loving it.
That's wonderful. Well,
And if you guys ever have any suggestions on things you want to talk about, please tell me because I will run out of ideas eventually. So anything you guys are interested in, I will be happy to put together something.
All right. Thank you.
okay.
Color.
Want to unmute yourselves. I muted some of you. Take a look. Yetta, Paulette, Janine, Dee. If there's anything you'd like to say, I had muted some of you for background noise earlier.
I like bright colors. I think a color abstract session would be cool.
Ooh, okay.
Ooh.
Am I on mute or not mute right now?
No, you're not on mute.
Okay, we hear you, Paulette.
Okay, well, I just had a real quick thing when you were showing those kids. I mean, my father went to work for the Western Union at the ripe old age of 7.
Yeah.
And he retired at the ripe old age of 70.
Oh my goodness.
From Western Union, right?
Yeah, Western Union.
Wow.
And he came to this country from a little town called Patsariki, Russia.
Wow.
Then he got here and
Did he ever like, injured injury? Was he ever injured on the job as a child?
What?
Was he injured on the job as a child?
No, luckily it was the Western Union and it was just telegraphs and all that. And,
Oh.
you know, one of the interesting things too that happened, one of his friends as they got older and World War II hadn't officially started yet, but he knew about the bombing in Pearl Harbor and he was, Dad's friend was stationed in Alaska, passed that message on to Roosevelt who kind of let it
Wow.
Wow. How cool.
morph, get bigger, and then he announced it. So it was kind of interesting.
I can't imagine 63 years in one place.
Oh my gosh, and how exhausting he would be too.
Yeah. I hope he got some retirement.
Oh yeah, he did. Yes.
Good.
He did.
All right, my friends, it was good seeing all of you. I'll see you
All
next
right.
week.
Bye-bye, Peggy. Thanks.
Bye, y'all. Have a good
Bye.
day.
You do such a good job.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, tomorrow, folks, we have, Woodstock loves this, cookie conversations. Gail is going to make those little, did she call them yum-yums?
Yo-yos.
Yo-yos, thank you. See, my brain. She's making raspberry yo-yos tomorrow. So
Yummy.
if you attend.
Cranberry. It's cranberry yo-yos.
What did I say? Raspberry?
Yeah.
I did.
They're both pink.
Y'all are so helpful. Thank you very much.
How about berry yo-yos?
Hey, she's making cookies tomorrow.
Yes.
Hey, all right.
There you
I can
go.
do that.
That's right.